get started. So I am going to start out by saying the following, which is what for those of you who take classes with me, you know this. This is sort of like a live podcast. I am not here to keep you from your wine. So drink away, please. Go ahead, drink away. Have whatever you want, but we're going to be teaching, learning, like talking about Sicily. I'm going to show you some maps. We're going to talk about the land and all that kind of stuff. And we are going to do that for about 20 minutes. And then we're going to taste the wines, 20, maybe 30 minutes, depending on your questions, right? So here's what I have to say. Pick whatever wine you want, drink it. I'm not here to keep you from your wine again. All right. So let's get started on Sicily. Now, Sicily is such an interesting place. It is the largest island in the Mediterranean. It is at the crossroads of the Middle East, of Europe, of Africa. It has all of these influences, and it's right across the Strait of Messina from mainland Italy, but it may as well be in many ways just miles away. I mean, it's almost a wine continent in and of itself. The island is triangle shaped. Let me show you. Let me get to my dorky PowerPoint. We're going to get right here, and we're going to just show you where we are here. So Sicily it's like the boot is kicking the triangle, and it's just separated by this little Strait of Messina from Calabria, which is over here. That's the toe of the boot. And Sicily is approximately triangle shaped. The most prominent thing is Mount Etna at 3,300 meters, or about almost 11,000 feet. So it is quite tall, and obviously an active volcano, constantly smoking, steaming, all those things, all that fun stuff. But we have over here the Ionian Sea, we have the Tyrrhenian Sea, we have the Mediterranean, and it is huge. I mean, that's one of the things I think that we often miss when we think about Sicily. It is a giant place. So when we think about what is here, it's not a one note. We're thinking about a place that has a lot of different terrain and a lot of topography, and that's what we're going to be concentrating on tonight. Now, it is in a very cool twist, because I don't think that people often think about this. It is a place that has a lot of hills. So it is the second hilliest area after Trentino Alto Adige in Italy. So it doesn't seem like it would be. It seems like Val d'Asta or one of those other places, but Sicily is very hilly, and there's a lot of hillside vineyards. The capital is Palermo, and in all of Sicily, we're not talking about the Sicilia DOC yet, but in all of Sicily, we have 98,000 hectares, or 242,163 acres of vineyard. It's the same size as German production, all of German vineyards. It is the same size as South Africa. It's like 3 New Zealands, all on this island. So if you can picture how many vineyards there are. Now, when I say that, some of you, the ones who are super dorky, and you know that I'm always like the skeptic here, are saying that's a lot of vineyards. They can't all be good, and like, wow, that's a lot of wine and blah, blah, blah. Yes, except here's a statistic for you. Although they used to be the largest producer, Sicily's production has dropped because they have lowered the yield. So although they have more vineyards land than anyone in Italy, they are the 4th largest producer of wine in Italy, after the Veneto with the Pinot Grigio and the Prosecco and all of the other stuff up there, and Puglia with the Primitivo and Negromaro, and then Emilia Romagna, which makes Lambrusco. So Sicily is the 4th largest producer. So we need to really consider that the quality has gone up, that it is not bulk wine anymore, that there is stuff that's being bottled. The other thing is organic farming. Almost a third of all of the organic vineyards in Italy are in Sicily. So again, it's got a great climate. It's really great for winemaking, but the producers are also really keeping an eye on this very, kind of sustainable, and that's such a buzzword, but really, truly sustainable. We'll talk about it later, attitude about how to do this right, how to farm correctly. So this focus on higher quality has led to great results. And what we have now is we have one DOCG, I'm going to go over what the triangle looks like. That's the denominazione di origine controllata e garantita, which is the only one, Terroir di Vittoria. We'll talk about that in a second. And then we have 23 DOCs and 7 IGPs, which are the larger kind of, bigger areas, the land wine that are a bit more for experimentation. The production, again, is half of what Veneto is. 30% is that DOC or DOP production, and it's rising. So again, this eye on quality. Interestingly, although we probably think, okay, it's warm, probably should be a lot of red, most of the production is actually white. There's a reason for that. We'll talk about that. Okay. The terrain of this place is crazy. I mean, again, we're not talking about this flat island in the middle of the Mediterranean. It's not a sandbar. It's huge and it's super varied. So that means that soils are important. Lots of different soil types are here. So there's going to be a lot of differences, even in the wines that you have. We're going to go over when we taste, like, we're going to have so many different variations on it. So it's almost like even within Sicily, within one wine, you get so many different variations because you have different soil types. You have some places that are hilly, some places that are mountainous. You have lots of variability. The climate in general is going to be Mediterranean, and it's going to be great for grape growing, but some of it is going to be a little cooler and some of it's going to be a little warmer. So you have all of this going on. Also, Sicily, not for nothing, didn't just pop out of the, well, I guess part of it did pop out of the ocean. It was part of a whole plate tectonic movement. It started in Pangaea, right? So it was part of South America. It was part of, attached to Spain. And then all of that broke apart. The last breaking point was the break away from Italy. But as a result of that, you have a lot of different soil types, the plate tectonics, plus all the volcanic stuff, right? All of this stuff is so amazing. And that is what is leading to a big diversity. So with that said, I will show you some pretty pictures now. You don't need to look at me talking about this. We will talk about the prettiness of Sicily instead. And when we talk about Sicily, 62% of it is hilly. I mean, you can see, just visualize what this looks like. There are a bunch of areas that are hilly within the all of Sicily. So if we look at the hillside viticulture, we see that a lot of it is in the southeast. That is limestone and volcanic soils. The Ceresuolo di Vittoria DOCG in Vittoria, this larger area here, is going to be a hot spot for really great soil types. It has a lot of red, rich, iron-rich soils. So you're going to get some really aromatic wines, some wines with a little bit of volume heft. There's something going on here. And it goes up to about 300 meters, almost 1,000 feet. So you have some variation. There's some stuff that's flatter, but the southeast is quite hilly. So you're going to get some really nice wines here, different elevations and different, soil types. Central southeastern Italy also. So Agrigento over here, there's a bunch of vineyards here. And also, all around this area, you're going to have a lot of hills here as well. And this is going to be more like chalk and marble, the carbonate base. So a little bit less volcanic, a little bit more of that calcareous rock, but there is some clay. So in the lower lying areas, you can expect that stuff is going to be heftier. It's going to be, thicker soils, heavier wines. And then there's some limestone, and that is going to be, or the marble, and that's going to make these wines more elegant, aromatic, fragrant, kind of a little bit edgier. And same grape, different results based on what you're going to have. And then there is this area up here, which is sort of, I had a hard time describing it, sort of like that central western area. It's a big area, but here, calcareous clay, then you have some iron-rich soils. Also here, higher elevations, you can get to some elevation here because there is a mountain chain here. And again, you're going to get some full aromas, and you're going to get some wines that are really elegant and pretty. So much is available within the hillside viticulture. So then we move on to mountains. When you look at the mountains, it shouldn't be a surprise that, of course, Mount Etna, our friend, the friendly volcano, is part of that mountainous area. Again, it's at 11,000 feet, 3,300 meters. And then we also have the Sicilian Apennine Mountains. So this chain of mountains goes across, again, even into this part of Sicily. And there you're going to have some elevation. So here, this is a vineyard that is in the Mount Etna area. They're not exactly like, they're not like right in the crucible of the volcano, they're around it. And so you're going to get different elevations. You will get some wines that are very, very edgy, very acidic. Those diurnal temperature swings are really going to make them very acidic and lighter. And then there'll be some things that are lower lying on different kinds of soil, and they're going to be a little bit heavier. So again, in general, that quarter that's in the mountains, the vineyards that are planted there the wines tend to be a little bit lighter and more elegant. You got a lot of igneous rock here. You got, that lava that's dried and hardened and then is underneath there. So you're going to get some really interesting and different flavors there. The flat part is over in the west. That's near Palermo, which is the capital. Trapani over here. This is the former area where, I guess it's still the area where Marsala was made. Now, this area has marine terraces, or we're talking about an island. So obviously there's going to be some marine life, some, old part of the seafloor that's here. So you have some of that. And a lot of it is kind of flat, but then it does move up into a hillier area as you get farther into the internal. The whites are dominant here. And I do think that it makes sense to just stop for a second and explain what the heck Marsala is, because you may be like, yeah, chicken Marsala. Yes, that is what we're talking about here. But we're also talking about a fortified wine that has been very famous, or was very famous for a very long time. So like all fortified wines, it is made as a regular wine, fermented. It is made with 3 grapes, or 3 main grapes, which traditionally were the grape now known as Lucido, which used to be Catarato. You have Insolia, which is also known as Ansonica. And then you have Grillo, which we're going to taste. And there are a few other local grapes that are used. Those 3 grapes were grown in that northwestern area. They were brought into the winery, blended, and then they were fortified, depending on the sweetness level that you wanted, right? So you could stop the fermentation and leave some sweetness in the wine. You could add back some, some sweetened must back into the wine. And so there are different levels. Some of them are actually, there's even one level that's made Solera style, like sherry. So it's a very interesting wine. It was popularized by a guy named John Woodhouse, a British wine merchant in the 1700s. And for a very long time during that period, when fortified wines were really big, it was very popular. Unfortunately, it's really fallen out of favor. And although it is this historic product, we don't see as much of it now, but we do see some of the dry wines coming out of there. But I think it's important to just explain to you what Marsala is. And it's not that cheap salted wine that you buy in the grocery store. That's, I'm not even sure, is that wine? I don't really think it is. It's like cooking sherry, gross. Anyway, one other area in the terrain that we should look at, which is the islands. So although they're small, I thought this was really interesting. You're going to hear in the podcast this week with Alberto Tosca, who I just adored. He's awesome. He talked about the islands and about how you could grow Moscato on any of these islands on the same exact soil types and have the same clones, and it would taste completely different. So the islands are being explored more and more, and they're really interesting. There's some, there's an archipelago, a couple archipelagos here. Pantelleria is very famous for its Moscato. It's a sweet wine. Some of it is, it's just, like apricots and full and rich, really a historic wine, also delicious wine, hard to find nowadays, because again, those sweet wines really are not in favor, but they're really quite unbelievable if you can get your hands on them. Hopefully, because some of these, this craze about volcanic soils, a bunch of these islands are volcanic. So maybe we will see more plantings, different plantings with time. Again, something to watch out for. The climate, could you get a more like ideal Mediterranean climate than Sicily? No, you could not. It's pretty consistent. You have this great, sun. You don't have rain until the late fall, so you don't have to worry about the rains coming in and impinging and ruining your vineyards. Yes, there are some areas like in the mountains where, and especially closer to the sea, where you are going to get more rain. But differences or the micro differences in climate depends on a few things. Elevation, right? Now we know Sicily is hilly. So at the top of some of these hills, you're going to have more of that sea breeze coming in off the sea, right? We're in an island. In some of the lower lying areas, it may be hotter. Some of it might trap humidity. Some of it might be drier. So all of these areas are going to make a big difference. Interestingly, you know, the north in some of the mountainous areas, it can be quite humid. So again, that's where you might have to worry about rot and mildew and things like that. But in other areas, the breeze is going to keep things really fresh. That dry climate, that like ideal climate, if you go back and listen to episode 306 with Alessio Planeta, no, I do not memorize it. I looked it up. Please don't think that like, I'm like, oh yes, I know the whole catalog. No, but it's a great episode where we talked about, you know, how great the climate is and how it's a little easier to do organics here because the climate is so amazing, right? It's such a great place to grow grapes. Now let's move on from Sicily to the Sicilia DOC. Why is this like, what is this? Why are we talking about this? And I had a lot of people say, what, like, why aren't you like talking about Etna? Well, because we're talking about a different part of Sicily and we're talking about a specific DOC. If you are not familiar with this, I'm going to go over it very quickly, which is that we've got basic vino da tavola. Then we have what used to be Indicazione Geografica Tipica or IGP Protetta. And that's just sort of the land wine. Those are larger areas. You can mix, you can blend, you can do a lot of things. And then we have the protected origins, right? Denominazione di origine protetta. These are areas that are protected. They are restricted in their yields. They have more of an identity in many ways. They are a little bit more controlled. They are tasted by a tasting board. You have your DOCs, and in Sicily, you have one DOCG. So understanding this, you know, we sort of went from, we went from a larger, you know, this is the whole island now to the DOC of Sicilia. Now, this DOC does include the entire island, but it includes only about 58,000 acres or 23,000 hectares, which is 24% of the vineyard area of Sicily. So it's not everywhere, although parts of it are considered part of the DOC. There's 7,800 wine growers, 504 bottlers. You can see that that is a little lopsided, but it's getting better. We're not seeing as much bulk wine. We're seeing more quality wine bottled, which is pretty amazing, right? So why did they make the Sicilia DOC? Like, why would you do that? There's a bunch of DOCs. I showed you that map. I mean, there's like a million of them. So why would you do that? Well, the idea was, it's really cool that there are a ton of DOCs, right? Like we have so many, all of these, right? All the Sicilian DOCs. The problem is that when you go and you look at a bottle and it says Oloro or it says Menfi on it, we don't know that it's Sicily. So this was actually a really great idea. What the producers decided was that they were going to take some of the areas where they were making wine, high quality wines, and they were going to put Sicilia on the label and make it a DOC so it could be more controlled and higher quality. Now, if you look here, I'm going to go over the grapes and then I'm going to talk about some of the nested DOCs. But the main grapes really are the things we're tasting tonight: Grillo and Nero d'Avola. Those are the main grapes of the Sicilia DOC. But there are so many others. So many others are authorized. So there are native grapes. There are like Ensolia, like I mentioned, or Ansonica. We have Catarato, which is now known as Lucido. We have, which we're going to taste next time, those two. We have Caricante, Zibibo, we'll taste that next time. Grecanico, all of these other grapes are here, Moscato. And then you have the international grapes, Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc and Pinot Grigio and Müller-Thurgau, and things that would grow here and things that were marketable, because in the 1980s, there was a renaissance here of people saying, hey, you know what? We're not going to be able to publicize our native grapes. So what do we do to get on the map? What do we do to make people recognize that Sicily makes great wine? And so they started growing international grapes, and they did it really well and wound up on the radar of people, and then they could bring in their native grapes. So there are a lot of international grapes here as a result of that. The reds, Nero d'Avola is clearly number one. We have Frappato, which we'll be tasting next time. Norello Mascalese and Etna, that's what it's known for. Norello Cappuccio also. Pericone, really interesting grape if you can get your hands on it. Nocera, and then you have all of the international grapes. Syrah, Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon. You have Pinot Nero, Sangiovese from the mainland. So Merlot, Alicante, so many different things that are grown here, plus more. But really, the idea is they are going to be typical of the land, about terroir. I want to just, before we get to, the wines, I want to talk about this, because what's really interesting is, and I think, oops, let me go back. What's really interesting here is that we have a bunch of these DOCs that are nested inside of the Sicilia DOC. And I think that this is a really good explanation about why they made this what it is. Okay, why did they make the Sicilia DOC in 2011? Because you can have all of these areas. You can have, okay, so it's, I'll read them off. The Contea di Sclafani, DOC, Contessa Entellina, Menfi, Noto, you can have Alloro, Vittoria, and Ceresuolo di Vittoria. So all of this, plus this area, plus an area over here, all of that can be part of the Sicilia DOC. Now, of course, because I'm me and you guys know me and I'm so nerdy, I was like, well, so like, what did they grow there? Why did they decide? Like, why? Normally what you would do is, we'll take, I know a lot of you took the Médoc class. Like, you have the Médoc, right? You can put the appellation of Médoc on a wine from Margaux, but you would not do that, right? Like, why would you do that? You're going to get less money for it. It's less prestigious. Margaux says more about the terroir, blah, blah, blah. But here it makes sense, because if I tell you, okay, so let's take like that southeast portion. You have the DOCs of Alloro, of Noto, of Vittoria. These things are like 78 hectares or 200 acres. They make like 10,000 cases or 10 to 30,000 cases. And the wines are similar. So you have stuff that's narrowed out. All the grapes that I mentioned, they're growing things here. Each of them has a specialty. But if you are Noto and you grow 68 hectares or 160 acres of grapes, and you have Nero d'Avola and Moscato Bianco, I mean, if you put Noto on the bottle and Sicilia is not there, people are not going to know what that is. So in that regard, when you're so small and not yet really known for your specificity, it's hard to put that on the bottle. So why not take advantage of Sicilia DOC? That's going to help you with the marketing. It's going to help you get your brand out. It's going to help people understand it. Even in Vittoria, where Ceresuolo is the one DOCG, using Nero d'Avola as one of the main grapes with Frappato, it might make more sense to use Siciliana as a DOC so that people know what it is, right? Like, they know where it's from. Contea di Sclafani, that's where a lot of the Alberto Tasca from the Tasca de Almarita, they have a lot of vineyards there. And they grow a lot of Lucido and Nero d'Avola and Pericone and international grapes. And it's a little bit bigger and they make a little bit more wine, but nobody knows that DOC. You'll hear him talk about that. Why not go and change it into Sicilia? So you have the status of being protected, tasted, quality, assurance, and all of that. But at the same time, you're not standing out on your own. Menfi is a little bit bigger. Planeta is there. They have a bigger production. They're a little better known, but still, here, I'll show you on the map where Menfi is, because we were in the southeast before. So all of those areas, Noto is right here. You have Vittoria, actually the town of Avola, we'll talk about it, is Siracusa. This is the area that we were talking about where Tasca da Amarita is. But, up here, Menfi is over here. Yes, it's bigger, right? It is bigger. Number 12 is Menfi. But at the same time, why people are not going to know what that is. So it makes a lot of sense. Also, if you do this, you can do things like initiatives like Sustain, which is such a great initiative. This is so practical. I love this. This is a bit of Alberto Tasca's brainchild, where all the producers came in and said, we could do organics, we could do all of that, and that's all part of what we want to do. But at the same time, We need to measure things. We need to get in here. We need to measure things, and we need to do a collaboration to share information and get data. Make data-driven choices about how to sustain our land that we are proud of, that generations have lived on and that generations will live on. It is, again, you'll hear it in the podcast coming up, but my goodness, like, I wish everybody would have an initiative that was based on data and measurement and not a purist attitude of it can only be biodynamic or it can only be organic. That's not a one size fits all. Instead, measure what's important and fix it. And that is what the Sustain Initiative is. Again, by bringing everybody together, you share best practices, and it's a great idea. All right, let's get into Grillo. Grillo is an amazing grape. So this grape is actually kind of new on the scene. As I told you, it was part of Marsala production. And what happened is they took Lucido or Catarratto, they took Zibibo or Moscato de Alessandria, and they crossed them. And they did this. There was a guy named Baron Antonio Mendola, and he crossed these things in the Trapani region where you have the Marsala production because they wanted something a little richer for Marsala. They did not feel like the Ensolia or the Lucido were really enough. And so they crossed this, and this grape turned out to be great. It was Grillo. It was fantastic. So after phylloxera, it was pretty disease resistant. It did well. It wasn't a prolific grape, but it had really good flavor. So this worked out really well. The problem was that in the 1960s, like all of Italy, like all of Europe for that matter, quantity, quantity, quantity. It was all about this sort of, I guess it was like, sort of this post-war, like, let's just produce and produce and produce. And the problem is, Grillo is not a big producer. So it was nearly abandoned in the 1960s until, it kind of limped along. And then in 1990, a guy who really was a pretty famous Marsala producer, Marco de Bartoli, decided to make a dry Grillo. And it took off. It was amazing. We're still learning a lot about this wine. It's mainly planted in the province, in the old Marsala area, but it is a great grape. So it's got a mid-ripening. It sort of ripens, it buds a little bit late. It ripens in early September. So it's mid-ripening, right in the sweet spot. It's got thick skin, natural acidity. All of that stuff comes together. And you have, again, it's something that's going to thrive on heat. So gosh, hello, New World producers are looking at this, right? It's going to thrive on heat. It does fine. It does great. It does great on so many different soil types. On limestone, on those lighter soils, it's going to be more minerally wine. On heavier soils, it might have a little more heft. There are also a couple of different clones, right? So you might grow what, but the main clones are one that's a little bit more medium bunch, compact bunch, high acidity. And these wines are almost more like Sauvignon Blanc. So as we taste these, some of you are going to have that version where it's zesty and bright and kind of sharp. And then there'll be another version. These versions are kind of smaller, looser bunches, lower acidity, a little bit fatter in the mouth. I think it's more like an oily kind of a white Rhone, right? A Rhone blend would be that. Those different styles, there's a debate about them. Of course, there's a debate about everything, but there's a debate about those styles. And it's part of the problem is that Grillo as a grape is easily oxidized. So if you put it in the winery, it might get some of those oxidized flavors like an old apple, right? You might get that. And a lot of people don't like that. So they've cleaned up the wineries completely and they've really gone for this very pure style. But there are some people who are more traditional who say that doesn't taste like what it's supposed to taste like. Instead, it's supposed to be fat and earthy, and it's going to be this oily kind of wine. So we're going to taste it now. I know some of you have already tasted it, but listen, some of us are going to have the style that's going to be more like Sauvignon Blanc. Some of us are going to have a richer, fatter style. And then I'll look in the comments and see what y'all are saying about it. But, if you look at the color, right, white sheet of paper, we don't look at it on the light, got a little bit of color. Those skins are there, or there's some skin contact. So we've got some nice big, a little bit of color here. All right. So give it a swirl, take a sniff. So I get nice white flowers. There's definitely minerality here, but there's peachiness to my wine. So I know some of you ordered the same wine. This is the Tenuta Repetala Grillo. And this wine is just It smells like it's going to be a little bit fatter in style. Spoiler alert, I already tasted it. So taste it, let it kind of sit in your mouth. Notice the acidity underneath your tongue, you know, watering and watering. Plus, is it cheek coating, mouth coating? So that, to me, that peachiness is there, plus citrus, plus some of that minerality. It's got nice cheek coating flavor. And at the same time, there's a lot going on, right? This, to me, is kind of lively, and it's got a little bit of a grapey finish. Really, really nice. I really like those kind of peachy, fatter bodied wines. Some of them, some Grillos are very, very light. Let me see and I'd love to know in the chat, does anybody have a really great food pairing? Because obviously I can't eat while I'm talking to you, but I'd love to know if you had anything that you were like, oh my gosh, this goes so well with food. Some waxiness I see. Donna's got the same one I have, great acidity, but nice feeling, that warmth, delicious with the goat cheese and walnuts. Yep, absolutely, $12. Peach, pineapple, absolutely, white flowers, and a little bit, Ramona's got a little bit of the Sauvignon Blanc note. So many different things. So I feel like this could be a spring wine. But then if you get the different style, it could be a summer wine. Like this could be one of your, you know, minerally beach wines where you take it in, you know, in an acceptable container, of course, to the beach. So pineapple, really, yeah, absolutely. Again, there's no wrong answers. We're all tasting the wines together. Tina's got the fuller style. Reminds Kathleen of Gruner. Yes, I could see that also, right? So some of that herbaceousness could absolutely be there. That is not out of the question at all. Amy's got the Sursa Grillo from Donna Fugata, similar to a Sauvignon Blanc, a little bit tropical. Luann's Grillo doesn't have a vintage. Well, we'll look at that later. Maybe it does. Maybe it's just hard to see. Tastes like grape skins. Yeah, Alicia, I'm getting that too, that grapiness on the finish, which I like. I love it. I don't know if you're asking me what my vintage is. I've got 2020. Okay, so citrusy. It looks like we're all sort of coalescing. All right, Robin Fisher saying it's great with tomato bruschetta and excellent goat cheese, right? The goat cheese is a little bit of the money move. I know that it's more French, but it's kind of a really good move, right? That, and maybe some like the olives, the saltiness is really fantastic. So yeah, fantastic. So pecorino, great with pecorino and honey from Dorian. Awesome. So it doesn't look like there's a whole lot of complaints about this, which is great, right? So somebody's got some sheep milk cheese. Also, that tanginess is going to go really well with the acidity. All of that comes together to be really nice. Now, what I want to say is the following. You have your Grillo, or maybe you weren't able to get it and you're not tasting it, whatever it is. Look at different styles. What I'm telling you is that Sicily is a continent in and of itself. So when you taste one Grillo style, I'm telling you, there's a counter style to it. Don't stop where you are. Keep going and try them. Make sure you read the notes, right? You know that I always tell you, go on Cellar Tracker and see what's there. Or, if you have a wine shop that you trust, ask them, is this one like lighter style or is it heavier? I mean, and you can even gosh, if you're really, really dorky, you can go on and look at the total acidity on some of the tasting notes. Some of them have that. And you'll be able to tell, is that something that's going to be a little bit higher in acidity, or is it going to be one of these fatter styles? So whatever. I really like my fatter style, but if it were really hot out, I don't think I would like that. Although it was 70 degrees here today. What is going on? Anyway, all right. So that is Grillo. Does anybody have any questions about it? I just see a lot of comments. No stupid questions, Bikram. Does Sicily produce any bubbles? Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. They produce every style of wine. So we have wines that are late harvest. We have rosato, rosé. We have white. We have red. Yes, they produce mostly in the Charmat method, like Prosecco. But yes, they absolutely produce spumante. Absolutely. Why is it so inexpensive? Ramona, also a really great question. Have you ever heard of Grillo? No, right? So when you haven't heard of a grape, it's really hard for them to charge a lot of money for it. You haven't heard of it. They can't really sell it. Plus the production costs are a little bit lower, but that doesn't mean that it's bad, right? There are some places where production costs are a little bit lower and also they can't charge a lot of money, right? Look at all of our wines from Spain, Portugal. some things are just, they just don't cost as much money, and especially wines that now you know about, but other people don't know about. So that's really great. Is it normal to have a blend 80? Absolutely. So that's another thing. All of these wines can be blended. I'm going to give you the spoiler alert in a second that I told many of you to get a wine that is mostly Nero d'Avola, but has some some grapes blended in. Why did I do that? I'm going to explain it in a second. Okay. So Nina had one bottle. Hey, Nina, that's all you need, right? You need one bottle of Grillo, and then you need to do research and ask your wine shop to bring it in, right? How long can it be kept? Well, it depends on your the style, right? Higher acidity wines are going to be able to be a little bit, you can keep it for 3 or 4 days. A lower acidity wine, you're probably going to want to drink it pretty much right away. So if you have one of the, lower acidity wines, that may be the first wine you want to drink. You want to wait till later and have your Nero d'Avolas later, because those are going to improve. So, all right, let's get to Nero d'Avola. Was it macerated? You have the one I have. I read the notes. I don't believe there was skin contact. I'm sure there was a brief period of skin contact, but it's not like an orange wine. It's not a skin contact wine. All right. Nero d'Avola is the most widely planted cultivar in Sicily. I didn't show you the pretty pictures of the Grillo grape. So here's the Grillo grape. These are the, kind of 2 different versions of it, and it will say Grillo on the bottle. I just always like to show you the label in case you didn't get one. It says it in pretty big letters, so you'll know if it's Grillo. And here's Nero d'Avola, the black of Avola. There's 46,500 acres of this grape grown here, 19,000 hectares, and it is that's not in the Sicilia DOC, that's all over the island. Obviously, this is the king wine. So in the Sicilia DOC, the Growers Consortium calls it the king of Sicilian vine varieties. This is their big red. This is the red that is really emblematic of Sicily. And we don't know exactly where it comes from. So it could have been brought by the Greeks. It also could have been, it could have been from Calabria, because the grape is called Calabrese. We know that in the 15th century it was mentioned. Then there was a botanist in 1696, a Sicilian botanist, who mentioned it. So the grape has been around for a very long time. It's not like Grillo, which started in the 1880s. It is much older than that, and again, could have a legacy that goes back to the Greeks. The official name is Calabrese, actually, even in the official Italian registry. But again, it's known as the Sicilian grape. They're not growing this in, they're not growing it in any volume in Calabria. Interestingly, this goes back to the history. And next time in our next, session, we're going to talk all about the history of Sicily. And, I love that stuff. So we'll get into that in the culture and food and things like that. But here in the 1980s, there was a real pivot. And again, I would advise you to listen to that episode 306 with Alessio Planeta, because we talk about this. Sicily was sort of going along and with a lot of bulk wine, and they were selling it to, this was very common. They were selling bulk wine to places up north, Barolo, Barbaresco, Chianti, also places in France where things didn't go so well, like the harvest didn't go so well. So they needed some color in their wines. They did a little oomph. So they would sell their wines in bulk to Europe, to Northern Europe or parts north. In the 1980s, a bunch of producers got together and they're like, we have so much going for us. What are we doing? What are we doing? We need to do something, and we need to do this better. We need to improve. That is when folks like Planeta and Tascada Almarita and Dona Fogata and Cusumano, they came in and they said, you know what? We're going to plant international grapes, and we're going to show everybody that we have the climate, we have the soil types, we have the wherewithal to make fantastic grapes. They hired a lot of consultants from other places to show them they were ready to go. And they made spectacular wines out of Cabernet Sauvignon, out of Syrah, out of Chardonnay, out of Fiano, which is a grape from Campania. And they launched them on the international scene. They got noticed. It was then that the door opened for them to say, guess what? We don't just do that, but we also have all of these native grapes. And Nero d'Avola was #1 on that list. After they showed that, after these producers showed that they could do the international varietals, Nero came right after it. And it was a hit because, as you'll taste in a second, It's such an amazing wine. Plus, it has many lives, right? It can be early drinking or it can be very serious and you can keep it for a while. In Sicily, now with the Sicilia DOC, Nero d'Avola must be a Sicilia. It has to be a part of a DOC. It is a prized grape and a prized wine. It likes heat, right? It likes heat. It grows in that southwestern corner that we were talking about before, that where Noto and, well, Avola, let me go back to the map so you can see her. Right down here, Avola is in Siracusa. So not too far from the places that really grow it around Ragusa. So you have all of these places that are growing it. It spread all over though. Nero d'Avola is grown all over the place in areas that are warm, even though this is really its original home, the southeast area. It is a fantastic grape for Sicily because it tolerates salinity in the soils. They do have some salinity in the soils. It tolerates drought. It's really good with heat. It can be really great with, you can train it really low. You can train it on a tree. It needs canopy management. And this is where you get into the quality things. Like you really have to do a good job of making sure that you control the vigor in order for it to be good. But if you do it right and you train the grape right, you're going to have fantastic wines. All right. The berries, if we look at our picture of Nero, so they're dark. They are very dark. They're oval. There's a couple of different clones. Now, there are probably more than just a couple. So if, again, you talk to somebody like Alessio Planeta or any of the bigger producers, they're going to tell you there's a million different grape varieties of Nero. There's so many different biotypes, as they call it. The older vines produce really rich wines. Also, the grape is very sensitive to terroir. So it likes, so in the hilly limestone soils, you're going to get cherries and roses, and you'll get a wild strawberry brambly note. You'll get minerals. You'll get some decent tannin sour cherry. On the heavier clay-rich soils, that's where you're going to get a lot of dark fruit and licorice, baking spices. You're going to get, candied notes, high tannins, lower acidity. So there's that. It's also very sensitive to climate. Humidity, not such a great thing, right? You're not going to be growing this in really humid climates. It needs some dryness. It doesn't do very well in drought-prone areas. It is susceptible to some mildew, but in the cooler areas, you'll get some nice herbal wines. And in the warmer areas, again, you'll get these different kind of candied, more darker wines. Winemaking also is going to make a difference. So when are you going to pick the grape? How are you going to grow it in the vineyard? How are you going to oak age it? Are you going to keep it fresh and bright and light? There is so much variation in terms of winemaking. So this grape has so many iterations. And again, instead of looking at it like, oh my gosh, I don't know what it is, there's so many different styles. There's a lot to explore. All of it is really quite delicious. There's so much experimentation going on. It responds really well to oak. It responds well to concrete eggs. It responds well to stainless. You could just put it in stainless steel. It does really well with amphora. Now they're doing a bunch of amphora aging. Some are going to be age worthy. Some are going to be for immediate consumption. We're going to taste two versions. Let's start out with our basic. Now, the basic one, even within the basic one, you're going to have some that are earthy and some that are more like overtly fruity and sweet fruit and things like that. So we're going to taste this. Now, are you confused? I told you, some of you, to get this wine, and it doesn't say Nero d'Avola on it. It is mainly Nero d'Avola, but I wanted you to get this wine because although it is mainly, it's a Donna Fugata Sedara, it is a Sicilia DOC, and the wine is mainly Nero, but it has some international varieties in it, and it is not oak aged at all. The idea is to show you how Nero can blend, right? How we can really do a nice merging of this with keeping Nero as the main focus with just a little bit of difference, okay? So let's take a look at our wine. I know, again, most of you probably have guzzled it down, but I'm gonna take the slow boat here. And we're gonna take a look at the wine, and it's a nice, at least mine, nice light color, even though it's got Cabernet Sauvignon and Syrah in it, right? So nice light color, and the legs aren't too huge. The alcohol on this one is it's somewhere on here. I'll find it later, but the alcohol is not high, right? You can look at the tears of the legs dripping down. Take a sniff. So this is going to, it smells a little bit like there's an orange undertone to it, a little bit of like tangerine note, really nice, like fresh minerals, herbs, smells a little bit like roses to me, a little bit like cherries, not anything too big. So a little bit fuller on the palate. You taste some of the Cabernet Sauvignon, but still those cherry notes, that lightness of being, not a heavy wine, right? This is a wine that can go well with cheese. It can go well with pizza. It can go well with so many different things. It's got these two things back and forth, heaviness on the one hand and lightness on the other. And this is a typical everyday drinking Nero d'Avola. Okay, the next one that we taste, the Reserva, is going to be a little bit different. We'll move on to the next one, which is the Reserva. The Reserva is going to be something that is a little bit heavier. The only requirement is not actually an oak requirement or an aging requirement. It's going to be an alcohol requirement. So it has to have a little bit more alcohol in it. It has to be a little bit more ripe, fuller, richer, all of that. Okay. So let's look at the wine. Darker, right? Some ripe, you see the ripeness. You can't see oak in the color, but definitely the ripeness, the darkness, right? All of that is going to be in these wines. This is going to be a richer, fuller wine than the first one, which is just a basic Nero d'Avola. Excuse me. All right. So mine actually does have French oak. If you happen to have this, it had 12 months of French oak on it, but this is going to be a little bit richer than the original Nero. Give it a sniff. All right. So plumminess, some dark fruit. You're definitely getting more of that dark fruit note than the first one. Very big, much bigger wine than the first. Okay. So take a sip. This is almost like a New World oaked wine, like almost like a Cabernet Sauvignon New World oaked wine. Really, really big and rich. Now, I don't get a ton of tannin off this wine, but I do get a ton of fruit. And I do taste a lot of that sweet oak, which is different from the first one where there wasn't any oak at all. This is a bigger wine. So what you can see is the difference when you taste the Reserva versus the basic wine. You see the breadth and depth of the Nero. So I think that the main point, and what I like about this tasting, this comparison of side by side, is this bigger, richer wine made from the same grape of this as this kind of lighter style. And what it shows us is how Sicily, in and of itself, is this paradox. It's also this, it's just this wine continent that can give us so many different things. And we don't have to just concentrate on one part of the island and say that's all it is. There is so much here, and there's so much that we can, learn by tasting these wines, by really getting into it. And I love the fact that we have 3 wines here, all grown on different soils, made by different producers, giving us results that, they're not New World results, right? We don't taste that, but they are fruity. They are accessible. They are food-friendly wines. They are wines that have a lot of legs, like they're very easy to like. And I think that as opposed to many Italian wines, the Sicilian wines, because they have so much sun, and especially from the Sicilia DOC, you have this ability to get these wines that have freshness and fruit. They are a great stepping stone if you're somebody who only drinks New World wines into the Old World. They open that door. And I think that, if you have the Reserva, you see that parallel, right? You see how the Reserva has all of that dark fruit. And then but then you take a step away and you have that lighter fruit on the Nero. So again, all of these things are coming together. And then the Grillo, the breadth, right, of all of that stuff. So next time we are going to cover, I'm going to take your questions, but I just want to remind everybody that next time We are going to cover the history of Sicily, the culture, and the people. Now, this may seem really odd, right? That we're like doing a whole thing on that. But that's the thing about Sicily. You cannot talk about these wines without talking about the backstory. So that's what we're going to cover next time. I'm going to take some of your questions now, and then we'll get to it here. So Dana has, is it 100% Nero? I'm not sure. The Reserva is 100% Nero, or at least 85% Nero. It cannot be labeled Nero d'Avola or any varietal unless it's at least 85%. That's the European Union rule, and it's also the rule here. Luann had street tacos from Costco. The wine would have been great. Yep. Also the white, right? Whites go really well with Mexican food, by the way. So 3 winners, fantastic, great wines. I'm loving this. Steve and Marietta, hi guys. Went well, tannic to silky over 4 hours. Yes, absolutely. So Rob, why is it so different? Are you talking about the Reserva? So it depends on the wine that you have, but yes, it is going to be the increased ripeness, right? It has to have 1% more alcohol. 1% more alcohol means 1 degree of ripeness more. So you're already starting out with some richness and fullness on the Reserva that you're not going to have on the regular Nero. That's to start. Then you will layer on things like aging, like oak, all of those things, the care that they probably have, for the Reserva, they're going to lower the yields. They're going to have richer fruit. So all of that is going to make a difference. And then of course, oak. Dana asked, other than dark fruit and oak, what else on the Reserva? For me, again, it's really just the power, higher tannin, a little bit lower acidity and higher tannin, so that it's more of a meaty wine, right? That wine is more for, meat, or for portobello mushrooms or eggplant, something a little bit heavier, as opposed to the original, or the basic, which we talked about, which is going to be a little bit lighter. You're just not going to have that heaviness and the weight, the body, I would say. How is Grillo different from Insolia or Ansonica? So Ansonica tends to be a little bit lighter. So a little bit, it can kind of sometimes disappear in the glass. Grillo tends to have a lot of these, that can have the honeyed flavors, herbal notes, tropical notes. It has just a lot more oomph, which is why they decided to make it, right? They made it to sort of come in to fill in some of the gaps from Insolia or Ansonica and Catarratto or Lucido, although Lucido is definitely coming along, and it's an excellent grape, as we'll talk about next time. Adam, do you correlate better lower yields with better taste? So yes, lower yields in general are going to mean, Adam, if you have, in my book, I talk about, and again, this is so Generation X of me, but, and I'm sorry if you're not a Generation X, you might still know what the Brady Bunch is, but in the book, I talk about yields and the Brady Bunch. So before the families merged, the resources were such that on either side, Cindy, Marcia, and Jan all got the maximum amount of resources because they were not competing. So they got all of the stuff, right? They were on their own. And then once they merged, there was less to go around. And so, everybody's stuff was diluted. So if you think about it that way, that's sort of how yields work. Lower yields are going to give more flavor and more, more color, more everything that you want out of the grape. If you nurture it and give each grape its due, yes, lower yields are going to be better. Absolutely. Stephanie, tempted to travel to Sicily, go for it. Oh my gosh, the food, drinking order. So if you have a really high acid Grillo, you can leave that until later. But if you don't, then I would recommend drinking that this evening if you have opened it and not used a Corvin or whatever. And then you want to go from things that are a little bit lower, things that are going to develop. So I think that your Reserva, some people complained that it was a little oaky. Leave that a night or two, revisit it again on Saturday, and it will be a different wine. I guarantee it. It will have evolved. It will have changed. Marietta and Steve talked about how their wine had changed over the course of 4 hours. Wait 2 days. Again, it's sort of like a lot of the wines that I talk about. I say, like I post about thing, all the time, say, oh my gosh, like 2 days, and it got so much better. So use your Reserva and let that go. And the Nero, I mean, if you have pizza tonight, drink that with pizza. The basic Nero, oh my gosh, it's so good. Or like, you know, pasta, any of that kind of stuff. It's going to go so well. So these are great food wines. That's the other thing that I'm going to tell you is that although they are from a Mediterranean climate, all Italian wines, whether it's even just a hunk of bread or cheese, these are not just for, they're not by themselves. Okay. They don't stand alone. We really need to look at this in a broader context, have them with food. If you did not enjoy them, you will enjoy them far, far more with food. If you did enjoy them, you'll enjoy them even more with food. Okay. All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you. I hope you all will come to the second session next month where we'll talk about a lot of the cultural stuff, which is so pivotal to the wines, and we'll taste some more interesting wines that are just going to knock your socks off. Patrons, I will see you in a second on the other hangout. Thank you all so, so much. I appreciate you being here. And again, I hope to see you next time. Good night.